I'd say perhaps like next Friday or next Thursday, Friday, or next weekend. It would be the best for me.
Okay. Next Thursday or next?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's okay for us because as the holiday is on Wednesday, so let's do it 16. Oh, no, 14.
Pessoal,
Oi.
estamos
Oi,
online de novo, tá? Na base do desespero aqui já e eu vou...
Ah, sim. Agora acho que tá rolando.
Tá rolando. Eu criei uma
Ok.
chave com o nome do departamento de geografia, seja o que Deus quiser agora. Eu acho que agora ninguém mais derruba a gente.
Tá.
E amanhã e sexta eu vou usar essa chave, ou seja, ninguém vai usar a minha chave. Né? Tá bom? Então acho que amanhã prosperaremos sem problemas.
Ok. Maravilha, Sádia. Você acho que pode tirar Ai, peraí. O coisa de mensagens do. Tô vendo aqui que a transmissão tá rolando. Tá legal, gente. Muito obrigado às pessoas que ainda estão aguardando. Acho que eu vou consultar a nossa palestrante para saber se a gente continua com a transmissão ou se a gente reagenda. Tinja, is it okay we just go with it now? Because I think now we are online in YouTube.
Okay, we are.
Yeah, we have to squeeze it a little bit. Perhaps we won't have Q&A, but I think now all the transmission broadcast now the problem is all solved. So
perfect.
I'll ask you gently to start again your presentation.
So I'll start from the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you for your patience and your time.
No problem. I'll try to shorten it a bit.
Yeah, I'll just have a say for the audience to explain what happened. Hello, everyone. We were dealing with broadcast problems. As you can see, we have this delay, but now I think we'll keep on till the end of the time predicted. As we have this problem, we won't have Q&A probably, but I'd like to thank you for your time and thank you for waiting for this conference. I think it is important a moment that we can share thoughts between urban geography in the Global South. I think it is really necessary as we are dealing in this process of planetary urbanization, and at the same time we are not we are facing some issues, like for example splitting the theories between planetary urbanization and decolonial thought. And I think now we have opportunity to listen to Chinje, so I will not extend anymore. I would just like to thank you, Chinje.
Yeah, so glad to be back online again. So again, let me just share my screen. Right, there we go. So I'll just try to start everything again. So hello, my name is Xinge, and I'm a third-year doctoral candidate at Freie Universität Berlin, or the Free University of Berlin in Germany. So I'd like to thank Danche very much for giving me this opportunity to speak here. And I also thank you all for the patience waiting for the technical issues to be resolved. So I am currently doing a degree in history, but I come from a multidisciplinary background. I had my undergraduate in geography and a master's degree in international development. So for today's talk, I'd like to share my intellectual journey over the past 4 years, during which I wrote my master's thesis, worked in a urban history research project, and researched my own thesis, researched my own doctoral thesis. So the title of my research is Behind the Ports, the Urbanization of Western India and the Lower Yangtze during Steam Globalization. So you will know the exact geographical definitions for the regions in a minute. But as for steam globalization, it basically refers to the period of the late 19th century and the early 20th centuries, and in particular, the years in between 1870s to the 1930s. The steam globalization period, which is also framed sometimes as the first globalization, is considered by historians as the era of high imperialism and increasing connections between different continents. So when speaking of steam globalization, we often have in mind many things: bustling wharves, expanding harbors, minglings of peoples from various places. Well, all of these made port cities an interesting subject to study. So over the last several decades, there has been an expanding scholarship on the history of global port cities in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. While some look into the internal dynamics of the city or their external overseas connections, others focus on the relationship between port cities and their hinterland. Two questions were explored. One, what happened behind the ports while port cities underwent exponential growth? And two, how and to what extent did port city transform their hinterlands? Opinions differed, of course. In the late 1970s, for instance, Rose Murphy, an American geographer and historian, compared the journey of India and China in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He concluded that while great Indian port cities like Bombay or Calcutta played an important role in transforming the entire subcontinent, their counterparts in China, for instance, Hong Kong or Shanghai, remained foreign enclaves at large and were almost divorced from their hinterland. Around 50 years later, John Darwin, this time a British global historian, revisited these two questions through a global comparison and a global mapping. His opinion is that in non-secular societies like China, India, or many other regions in Asia, port cities didn't and couldn't do much. We also hear voices from scholars specializing in certain regions in the global south. For instance, this recent monograph on the urbanization of India during the British period again stressed on the important role played by port cities. And within the Chinese academia, the issue of port city hinterland relationship captured scholarly attention already in the late 1990s. The pioneering works, for instance, this one, whose title could be roughly translated into Port, City, and Hinterland, focused almost exclusively on Shanghai and the Yangtze Valley. More recent contributions, such as this book series, explore scenarios in other parts of the countries to different degrees. Scholars in China tended to agree that port cities, be they small ones or big ones, be they coastal or riverine, played an essential part in stimulating social and economic progress in the inland. Well, all these authors, American, British, Indian, Chinese, shed light on the two questions from their own perspective. They all seem to share a rather simplified or even biased view on hinterlands. In most cases, they just equated hinterland with rural areas that simply supplied raw material or cheap labor either to the port city or overseas through the port cities. Well, that is not to say that inland urban centers were completely neglected in the literature. Almost all the contributions gave inland centers like Pune in Western India or Nanjing in the Lower Yangtze a mention. And in particular, in this book, the author devoted around 5 pages to analyze and scrutinize the urban growth of several important inland cities behind Shanghai. But taken as a whole, the literature tended to treat port city hinterland relationship as an urban-rural split, thereby understudying and researching two entangling and coexisting processes behind the ports, namely industrialization and urbanization. So If we stick around and think about why is there an urban-rural split, things get perhaps more intriguing. My personal take on this question would be that it's nothing coincidental, but something rooted in the intellectual traditions and practices of not only history, but humanities and social sciences discipline as a whole. So to start with, on a theoretical level, I think perhaps the world system theory has its own contribution. Well, of course, I'm not here to challenge the entire world system theory, and I personally do admire and endorse, its insights into how a global economy functioned, and developed for centuries long. My only slight concern here is that the world system theory tends to overemphasize global trade or global market processes in some cases, and in the context of a peripheral or a semi-peripheral economy, it sometimes may trigger a bifurcation of scholarly attention in between port cities, which acted as the node of exchange, and rural areas, which provided merely agricultural goods. Well, secondary cities in the inland and smaller cities, regional urban networks are often silenced from the story. Relatedly, but perhaps more practically speaking, I have some problem with the primary sources historical literature used. Well, partly due to the world system theory and perhaps its own dominance, trade feeders, customs reports are the most favored sources among historians working on this topic. Equally popular among them are consular records and travelogues and memoirs written by either foreign institutions or foreign expats in China and Asia. If we take the sources as a whole, we easily get an impression that almost all the sources are produced by and centered around foreign institutions and expats that are based in port cities, perhaps felt at home there, but perhaps had limited interest or knowledge on the area behind the ports. So perhaps just to summarize, the first part of the literature review a bit. So the first and foremost goal of my doctoral research is to revisit the two main questions I mentioned before, mine a different set of primary sources, and in doing so, add an urban and industrial perspective to the story. Well, I am, of course, not the first person who realized that there were industrial and urban growth behind the ports. Economic historians have been constantly reminding us of the growth and prosperity of upcountry manufacturing centers in China and India in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. And from urban historians, we also understand that in so many cases, behind Shanghai and Bombay, urbanization and industrialization went hand in hand. But these strands of literature have its own shortcomings. Well, it seems to me that they tend to either focus on the rather grand regional industrialization process or dig into the very details of the stories of individual cities. Regional urban networks, especially the relationship in between port cities and inland cities, are still missing from the story. So partly due to my own background in geography and social sciences, I benefited a lot from theories on urban geography and spatial economics as I started to formulate my project. And here I'm only mentioning two examples. The first one might already seem very familiar to you, which is the mercantile model developed by James Vance. And the second one is the spatial economy, which is also one of the foundational books in the field. And I also benefited from historical studies, of course. Methodologically speaking, this book, which mentions two pairs of cities in the late 19th, early 20th centuries in the Middle East, was of great help to me. And specific to China and India, I benefited a lot from some old writings of William Skinner and Douglas Hines, respectively. So, too much about literature, and now let's just move on to the project itself. So, as I've probably mentioned earlier, the project is a comparative study in between two regions, Western India and the Lower Yangtze. So here are the two regions and their locations in their respective countries. For Western India, the primate port city is Bombay or Mumbai now. And in the lower Yangtze, here's the most important city, Shanghai. Many assumed that I picked these two districts these two regions because of Murphy's book. Well, perhaps the more important reason would be I see so many parallel stories or similarities between them as I started my research. Well, to start with, since the 15th century, both regions underwent some proto-industrial development and urban growth. In other words, there was a strong handicraft and urban tradition in both regions. And in the period I study, since the 1870s, both regions were increasingly integrated into the global market or the global economy. They exported raw material, and consequently, their agricultural sector became increasingly commercialized and specialized. Transportation also progressed in this era. So in the late 19th century, both regions underwent a railway mania, and in the case of the lower Yangtze, perhaps steamships along the Yangtze River and the Great Canal should also feature in the story. Additionally, no later than the 1890s, industrial capitalism emerged in both regions. First, in port cities like Bombay or Shanghai, but gradually spread it to the inland. Almost at the same time, nationalism and anti-imperialism also surged in both regions. The movements tend to move rather in parallel at the beginning, and both of them peaked at the start of the First World War. And very interestingly, they sort of converged together during and after the war, with the rising, prospering, flourishing commercial industrial class playing an important role in domestic politics. Against all these backdrop, we observe a considerable urban growth behind the ports. So here I'm showing the number of urban settlements in both regions from the 1880s to the 1930s. So basically, we see a continuous growth in the number of urban settlements. And here's how it looks on maps. So here's Western India, the distribution of the city with various sizes, and also the district urbanization rate. So here's Western India, and here's the lower Yangtze region in China. So now let's perhaps go one step forward and identify the regions or the district that experience the most significant urban growth within each of the region. So to do this, I actually invented this concept myself. So to be considered a urbanizing district in either regions, a district has to fall into at least two of the following categories. There should either be an increase in the number of urban settlements within the district, or an exponential growth in the city population or district urbanization rate, or there should be some sort of qualitative recognition of urbanness, which could be reflected in administrative hierarchy or other official forms, or there should at least be a strong mention of non-agricultural growth in the primary or secondary sources I come across. So if we apply these criteria to the two regions, here's what we're likely to get. So as we can see from the left-hand side, in Western India, we've got 4 inland urbanizing districts, among which 3 of them, namely Ahmedabad, Sholapur, and Nagpur, attributed their urban growth almost entirely to a prospering modern manufacturing sector. And similarly, in the lower Yangtze, we have 2 industrial districts, namely Nantong and Wuxi. So to briefly summarize, so in both regions, there was a considerable urban growth behind the ports driven by industrialization. Alongside the parallels or similarities, we see also differences. Well, the first thing to mention is urban population growth. Well, urban historians have been reminding us that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, cities like Shanghai or Bombay experienced an explosive population growth. But my question would be, so how fast was their growth, or how significant was their growth in comparison to their inland neighbors? So I mined some historical censuses, typed them all in Excel, and did some math. And if we sort of rank the rate of urban population change from the top to the bottom, here's what we like to get. So I suppose the first message I get from these two Excel sheets is that while Bombay was no longer one of the fastest growers in Western India in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Shanghai continued to lead the way in the Lower Yangtze region. And the second thing, and to make things a bit fancier, I also compared the urban primacy of Shanghai and Bombay within their respective regions. Well, since I'm speaking to a group of urban geographers, I assume, I don't think I could explain more. I don't think I should explain more about what urban primacy means. So there are plenty of ways to measure urban primacy. I used two indices in this project. So the first one is the Ginzburg Index, which compares the size of the largest city in relation to that of the 4 largest cities. Here's the result. And the second index I use is the rent size coefficient, which compares the size of the largest city to that of all cities in the region. So to do this, we need to first perform a rent size distribution analysis for each of the for all of the urban systems. And the rent size coefficient is defined as the gap in between this Lord normal hypothetical line and the real rent size distribution of the system. So, and here's the result. So if we put these two tables together, the second message I have today is that in between the 1880s and the 1930s, but especially in between the 1910s and the 1930s, while Bombay's primacy in Western India declined a little, the same for Shanghai in the Lower Yangtze rose or even skyrocketed. And the last thing I did is a bit more qualitative. I traced the stories and connections of industrialists or industrial families who invested in inland cities in inland city in Western India or the Lower Yangtze during the time period I study. So I call it basically regional business networks. And I used many sources of different kinds, governmental publication, which sort of gave me a list of all industrial concerns in operation at a certain time period. I searched websites of the industrial concerns if they still survive today. I used historical newspapers. I used historical magazines, other sort of journals, and so many stuff. And I basically try to track and trace the stories until I see no hope in it. And in the end, I managed to find 48 individuals or family for Western India and 71 in the Lower Yangtze region. Well, all of the stories are unique and intriguing and fascinating. But if we sort of categorize them a little, we see some interesting patterns. So I think the main conclusion I can draw from the categorization is that while in the Lower Yangtze, if an industrialist is interested in investing in the hinterland, he or she was most likely to have drawn from sources in Shanghai, whereas in Western India, industrialists tend to equally rely on resources in the local city, beyond the region, or in a different inland city. What it sounds a bit abstract, So perhaps we can put everything on maps. So here, the maps show that in the lower Yangtze, industrial networks or industrial business networks tend to concentrate heavily and increasingly on Shanghai. And as time goes by, we also see some strengthening links in between Shanghai and multiple inland centers, especially in between Shanghai and Wuxi. Western India simply exhibits a very different pattern. Well, to start with, there's no particular city pair that is significantly more connected than others. And in terms of concentration, of course, Bombay is an important node that the network concentrated, but so was Ahmedabad in the north and Nagpur in the east, especially in later stages. So these are perhaps the very preliminary findings of my research for the moment. And I suppose the next step, and perhaps the more challenging but important step, would be to single out the factors that might explain these differences and similarities. So I've got a few factors in mind, including institution, financial capital, some sort of social history, the entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, knowledge and technology, and transportation. But I mean, these are really very preliminary thoughts. So I look forward to your comments or opinions to that. And perhaps the second thing I'd like to discuss with you would be the contemporary implications of this project. Well, personally, I've been long interested in the discussion of the relationship between globalization and regional/spatial inequality. So, and I do hope that my project will speak to this topic. Well, to me, perhaps the study of regional urban network or regional urban system is actually a study of the distribution of resources across a given space. So the large question I have in mind would be, so why do resources, for instance, capital, technology, information, concentrate? And why are they more concentrated in some regions, in some contexts, for instance, the lower Yangtze, than others, for instance, Western India? And perhaps the last questions would be, under what circumstances would the big brother or the node of concentration, the node of resource concentration, stimulate or hinder the rise of its neighbors? So, I mean, these are the questions I have in mind, and I really look forward to hear your thoughts on that. So that's the end of the talk, and I should hand back the floor to Danche.
Okay, Chinje, great topic, great presentation. Thank you so much for your words. I particularly like a lot how you mixed methods and in a way that they don't fight against each other, because sometimes it's something that is hard to do, as you can't assume a method for the whole research, and I think you've done it very well. And I'd like to do a word for the audience. I don't know, I think we have kind of half an hour now or less, right?
We have around 10 minutes, I think.
Oh, 10. Okay.
Sorry.
Your research is very interesting. As we don't have time, we won't open for Q&As, but I'd like to hear from you, almost like a challenge, because you talk about the next steps, and now I want to listen from you. How do you see this change of pressure factors to the industrializing cities nowadays that you mentioned, capital information, and now we are facing this complexity of IT, pushing changes in urban in the urban issue, and we are watching, for example, in Brazil, the deindustrialization phenomenon and the rearrangement of the geopolitics now is changing the past trends that we saw in the last decade regarding the globalization, and China is leading this movement in some areas. And how do you see these trends on both regions today? I think that's the only thing I can think now to ask you, just as kind of challenge for you, just with no big commitment on your side, just to think and push your research forward.
Wow, I mean, it is really a challenging question, and it really, requires lots of hard thinking or hard mental labor. Well, I would say I know very little about the Brazilian context. Well, I understand. I mean, there were once great industrial developments in Brazil, but later on, and there was some sort of deindustrialization process. But I am not very familiar with the context, so perhaps I'll leave that part later on in the answer.
Yeah,
and
actually, just a word. I did exactly the opposite that you do. I mixed a lot of issues with no direction, no exactly direction. So my focus is regarding how this trends for the next decade. How do you see they're affecting Shanghai and the region from Mumbai?
Oh, I see. So I think regarding the time period I study and regarding the industrialization I mentioned in the presentation, well, I'd say first Shanghai and Mumbai are the main industrial hubs of the region throughout the decades. So they are the most important industrial hubs, and they are also the point where inland cities got they are also the point where inland city got their inspirations. But the degree to which inland city relied on resources and information on Shanghai and Bombay is different. Yeah. And in terms of, so I would say that in both regions, I don't really see any sort of competition in between inland industrial centers or in between inland industrial center and let's say, port city. I don't really see any sort of competition between them. But I mean, of course, entrepreneurs and industrialists based in the inland and based in the port have different kind of demands, which can be seen, I mean, from their political stances, so on and so forth. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yeah. I was wondering about because India and China has different approaches on how the industry are state oriented, the investments.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's a big change as India has a very liberal government, and China try to control kind of the movements of the flows of capital and how the market trends model the urban spaces and the economy. So, okay, this is just a final question from Daniela.
Mm-hmm.
If you have looked at mentality of economic behavior on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. So I have a separate chapter on the social history of industrial entrepreneurs, in which I would investigate their motivations for investing in certain locations. Well, I haven't really, thought through how the chapter would work, but my preliminary finding already indicate that their decisions are not entirely driven by economic considerations. So, and their feelings and their decisions is quite mixed. So in some cases, they intend to invest back in the inland because they want to help their families or the extended families back in their hometown. In some other cases, they want to escape some sort of, competition or even, emotional humiliation from the foreign powers. So there are so many issues. So, and I personally wouldn't think their decisions are entirely, rational, economical, so on and so forth. Yeah, but it's a very interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think on Friday we will have a seminar by Artena Nguyen from Vietnam, and she studied a lot this how the families are related to this industrialization trends in Vietnam. I think it will be a good opportunity to we share some thoughts for the audience on this subject. So I think we are finishing now because now Chinje has some commitments and we can do nothing. We just like to thank you a lot for your time. Wishing a good involvement on your thesis and a good finish to it. And I'd like to thank you all, our audience outside from Brazil, and now I will have a little say in Portuguese for our Brazilian audience. Pessoal, gostaria de agradecer a presença de todo mundo. Infelizmente, nós tivemos alguns problemas técnicos e a palestra teve que ser reduzida o tempo por a Tindia já ter alguns compromissos inadiáveis. E esses problemas técnicos foram resolvidos para amanhã. Então, amanhã nós teremos a transmissão normal às 2h da tarde do Pedro e do Nelson, que farão a apresentação do trabalho deles no Observatório das Metrópoles sobre as tendências de TI e o impacto delas nas mudanças de urbanização, especialmente sobre os galpões logísticos. I would like to the audience from outside Brazil, and tomorrow we have 2 p.m. in Brazilian time zone, another seminar by 2 researchers from Observatório das Metrópoles, which are studying the impact of the logistics and of the IT companies and big tech companies and how they are changing the urban Brazilian scenario. Chinje, again, thank you. I hope we can further our relation. We have more contacts on this, and as I studied a little bit on transport issue in Brazil, and I think we have a lot to do in this. We can do some interesting changes. So thank you, and hope to see you again. Thank you for the audience. Wait to see you tomorrow with no technical issues. Thank you, Daniela. Obrigado, Assad. And I think it's it. I would like to thank you, the Human Geography program, graduate program. And hope to see you guys tomorrow. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Obrigado. Thank you.
Tchau, Chinje. Obrigado.
Tchau.
Obrigado, Assad, Daniela. Bom, é isso, pessoal. Eu espero vê-los amanhã. Nós tivemos alguns problemas, como eu já disse, então eu até estou meio que me repetindo, peço desculpas por isso. E, bom, amanhã nós teremos uma palestra muito interessante. A ideia é a gente continuar fazendo essa apresentação de pesquisadores, né, desses 3 países e tentar, de alguma forma, fazer aos participantes e aos ouvintes estimular a reflexão sobre as diferenças de padrões urbanos no sul global, sem abrir mão de uma perspectiva crítica e levando em conta que há espaço mesmo na crítica para a gente não pensar só em totalidades, mas também como há especificidades em cada país, em cada cidade, em cada contexto. E é isso, pessoal. Agradeço mais uma vez e espero vê-los amanhã. Okay? Amanhã a palestra será em português e na sexta-feira a gente terá a apresentação da Artena Nguyen, que fará a palestra dela em inglês. A gente vai disponibilizar as legendas do YouTube, tanto em inglês como em português. Não são legendas exatas, mas é o que foi possível no momento. For the English speakers audience, tomorrow we'll have a seminar in Portuguese language, and we will turn on the subtitles in English on day after, so you can watch the seminar. It is not an exactly translation, but that's what we can do so far. So that's it. Hope to see you tomorrow. Daniela, would you like to have a final word?
I just thank everyone. Obrigada, gente. Valeu. Vamos aí amanhã. Depois de amanhã, tamo junto.
Amanhã vai dar certo. Obrigado, gente. Obrigado, Sadi. Acho que pode encerrar a transmissão. E até amanhã, pessoal, em português. Valeu.